You're awake now, huh? I'm very happy to be here. It's really hard to get to Regina, from Arizona. I think the next business project for First Nations from Saskatchewan is to start your own airline. So you can go back and forth to Phoenix, real quickly. I'm from, as has been said, I'm from a Navajo Nation, and thank you for the fine introduction, and Edmund singing praises as well. But actually, I'm just a guy from the res. I'm not anybody special. I'm just an old sheep herder. I grew up on the Navajo Nation. And had some opportunities come my way, and I jumped on those opportunities. And that's brought me to this place in time. I've been doing this work for nearly 30 years. And all along the way, I've met some just absolutely wonderful people. Chief Belgard for one, Jamie for another, and many others as well. And by way of introduction, the Navajo Nation is 27,000 square miles of land. Our land is huge. Just the other day, my wife and I drove from Flagstaff to Denet College, the college of the Navajo Nation, and went to graduation. It took us 3 hours. And not once did we ever run into any non-Aboriginal communities. And we were driving east. And we number over 350,000 people. So our population is huge. And at Navajo, our language is still intact. Our cultural ways, our ceremonies are still intact. I speak Navajo fluently, so does my wife as well. And we still have clan structures that are still very, very strong. And as you can see here are my clans. In Navajo, we always mention our mother's clan, which is our clan, our father's clan, our mother's father's clan, and our father's father's clan. And this is a really important part of who we are, because you never know who might be your relative sitting out in the audience. So we always say our four clans, so that's what we always say. And you never know who might be out there as relatives. So if you find some relatives, you have to make sure that you avoid them, because they're going to ask you for some money, right away. And my wife's clan is Kia'ani. She's the Towering House people. And then her father's clan is Pikmatotni, Deer Springs people. And then her mother's father's clan is Minigoats people. And then her father's clan is Ashchit. So when we first met, my wife wanted to hold my hand, and I said, no, you can't hold my hand. The reason why is because you have to exchange your clans first before you even hold hands, before you even smile at each other, Because you never know who might be your relative. So we had to make sure that we were not related, and then I let her hold my hand. That's not true. So you can't just go snag anybody, You really have to. It's protocol, because you never know. You might be holding hands with your sister or your brother, or even your mom or your dad, So you have to be very careful. So in Navajo, this tradition is still alive and well. Here's where I grew up. I grew up in wheat fields as a young boy and went to school in Tuba City. In wheat fields, when I grew up, we had no running water, no indoor plumbing, we had to have wood for heat, and we slept on the ground with a sheepskin. And I grew up with my grandparents. I had the really good fortune of growing up with them. Even though I'm Harvard educated, I have a doctorate from Harvard University. You know, my greatest education was being with my grandmother and my grandpa, herding sheep, taking care of horses, taking care of cattle, and that's really my greatest education. And it happened in wheat fields, and it's just a wonderful time in my life. I reflect on it often, and my claim to fame are my grandparents, and also my children, and also my grandkids as well. Here's my grandma standing in the middle, and my two grandpas. My grandmother is the youngest of our clan, and she's my mother's mother. And my other two grandpas are here as well. Here's another grandpa. His name is Dinesh Tosa. He was a counselor back in the day. Wonderful gentleman. By the way, all of my grandpas are all medicine people. So I come from a long line of medicine people. Here's another grandpa, Dagash Chili, with his son. So his curly mustache. And this one here, Dinesh Tosa, means tall, thin man. And so this is curly mustache, my grandpa. Here's the eldest of my clan, Dagath Chi, red mustache. And he was a well-known medicine man. He traveled all over the Navajo Nation on horseback. Sometimes he'd be gone for months, conducting ceremonies all over. And unbeknownst to us, my wife's grandpa was also a medicine person. And so the two of them used to get together. We didn't know that until one of our grandpas told us that the two would get together and actually conduct ceremonies. And they would do ceremonies on each other as well. So we didn't know that there was this connection from way, way back. And so my wife and I have this connection that's really very, very interesting. But this gentleman is, they don't make him like they used to, the elders back in the day were just absolutely phenomenal people. They knew how to live out there. They knew how to think well. They knew exactly how to be. And they knew about life. And they all lived, by the way, all my grandpas and my grandma, they all lived to be over 100 years old. So in Navajo, the purpose in life is to live to be 102 years old. And this gentleman here lived to be 118. Really interesting. He lived to be 118 years old. At Northern Arizona University, I teach nation building courses, graduate level courses. I also am tasked with beginning the Tribal Leadership Institute. And we do a number of executive education sessions for tribal managers, directors, and also chief executives, and also counselors. So on July 24th, 25th, 26th, we're going to have a session specifically, exclusively for chiefs and also counselors at Northern Arizona University. So if anybody's interested in coming to the beautiful Flagstaff, Arizona, you should think about coming and joining us at that session. Back in the 80s, when I went to Harvard to pursue a doctorate at the Graduate School of Education, I connected with these two white guys, a natural resource economist and a sociologist. So these guys were wrestling with this question, why is it that some indigenous nations do better economically than others? So for the next many, many years, we sought to answer this question. We already knew why some First Nations were not doing well, but we wanted to know why these were doing really well. What are the keys to success? That's the question we wanted. Those are the answers that we were seeking, and this is the question that we sought to answer. And I want to talk a bit about that here shortly. But let's look at the world economic stage. In Detroit, Michigan, they filed for bankruptcy in 2013. They owed more than $20 million. So the question is why? Puerto Rico filed for the largest U.S. municipal bankruptcy. They had to set up a special process so they could go through bankruptcy. And they owed $123 billion. And then the hurricane hit. And their situation is even in more dire straits. So Puerto Rico is thought of as the Greece of the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela, as I stand here today, there's food shortages going on. People are rioting. And they sit on some of the largest oil deposits in the world, but they're floundering. You know, they only have $10 billion in the bank, and they have 32 million people. And people are leaving Venezuela because they cannot make a living there. So the question is why? Here's Greece. They owe $326 billion to the International Monetary Fund. And they couldn't pay the money back. And it's the first time that they failed, any country had ever failed to pay the IMF back. So the question is why? You know, Greece is thought of as a country that's world-renowned for Aristotle, Socrates, you know, sort of when people talk about, you know, the epitome of knowledge, they think about Greek philosophers, you know. But for us as First Nation people, we think about our elders. We think about my grandpas, my grandmas. So here's the situation with Greece. The IMF finally struck a deal, but it meant they would be in debt for a long time. The situation would be just absolutely horrible. In its worst situation, every Greek that had money in the bank, they were not allowed to take more than $400 out of the ATM because they didn't want a run on the banks. So the question is why? On the other hand, you go to Northern Europe, you have countries like Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway. They have low levels of national debt. They have low and stable inflation, low crime rate, long lifespan of the people, low child mortality rate. So why is it that in the same region of the EU, the European Union, you have one set of different results and another different set of results? So why is Greece worse off than these Nordic countries? Because of the following things. Greece misspends money. They don't know how to take care of money. They don't save any money. They lack good governance. And they did not invest in education. They didn't invest for the long haul. Another reason, they have just a really poor legal structure. In fact, there's so much dishonesty, corruption among the judges and public officials that everything falls apart. One judge would rule one way, another judge would rule the opposite. They have a national tradition and pride to not settle outside of courts. So there's a certain amount of stubbornness that these people have to not seek peacemaking. There's a lack of respect for law. First Nations here in Canada, you do not enjoy establishing your own legal structure. You can have a judicial system, you can have an executive system, a branch, you can have a legislative branch, but you're not allowed to have courts. It's like having one hand tied behind your back and you're told to go chop wood. You know, you're told to build a nation without a court structure. It doesn't work that way. Nations throughout the world that are being built, you must have court systems. You must have court systems. However, don't build them like Greece. So let's take a look back. Here's federal Indian policy in Canada. So you have, back in 1534, this is probably when First Nations were actually considered sovereign entities. And subsequently, through the years, you had the Royal Proclamation, you had laws, treaties, land expansion, military expansion, all the way through 1764. Chief Bellegarde talked about 1876 when the Indian Act was enacted. Then the amendments to the Indian Act in the 50s and the 60s, the White Papers of 1969. Then you have more Indian Act amendments in 1970s. Everything in the blue here is when you absolutely had no say-so in how your institutions of governance was set up. So for decades and decades, the federal government of Canada said, have I got a deal for you? This is how I'm going to screw you, you know? This is how I'm going to mess you up. We're going to tell you how you're going to be. We're going to tell you how we're going to organize. And they've done a really good job. So why do you think we have so many problems? Because sovereignty, self-rule, or jurisdiction is not fully in your hands. And only recently have things begun to change. With the James Bay and Northern Quebec changes, Nunavut and Labrador Inuit land claims, Section 35, the Haida decision, Nisga's signing a treaty. Things began to change. And then we're in this 2014, you had Sioux Valley Dakota Nation Governance Agreement. One of the first agreements that have ever been signed where a First Nation says, this is the way we're going to govern ourselves. So, Canadian First Nations have only been experiencing true, or quote-unquote true, self-governance in a relatively recent time. You have not fully asserted sovereignty. It takes 30 to 40 years from the moment where you assert sovereignty to actually enjoy the fruits of your labor. This is the way it is in Eastern Europe after the Iron Curtain fell down. No longer were these Eastern European countries reporting to Moscow, and they're only beginning to see the fruits of their labor. This is why a lot of chief and councillors here always fly to Ottawa, you know? So when the members go to see the chief, say, where's Chief so-and-so? Well, he was in Ottawa. Come back next week, where's Chief so-and-so? Oh, he's still in Ottawa. Next month, he's in Ottawa again, you know? Pretty soon there's rumors, oh, he has a girlfriend in Ottawa. All these councillors are always flying over there, you know? So if I had my own airline, I'd fly all these chiefs around to Ottawa, you know, make a lot of money. This is why. Because you're always going there. Because you have to get federal acknowledgement. You have to get permission. And it's only been recently that things have begun to change. So, where are we at? I think we're in a recovery period. We're not in self-determination. You know, we're in this nation rebuilding period. We're in this recovery period where we have to begin to think very differently about how we organize, how our governing structure is set up. So, in order to figure out where we're headed, we have to know where we've been, we have to know where we're at, what are the challenges facing us? Let's take a look at the infant mortality rate. The infant mortality rate is the single most comprehensive indicator of the level of health in a society. If you want to find out how well a nation is doing, look at their infant mortality rate. And it measures the well-being of families, children, and infants. So the infant mortality rate measures from the birth to 364 days. If a child can live to be 365 days, then he or she is no longer an infant mortality statistic. So we're trying to get babies to live beyond 1 year of age. And in Canada, First Nations infant mortality rate is twice as high as the rest of Canada. In Inuit infants, the rate is 4 times higher. There's very little information about infant mortality rate in Saskatchewan. For that matter, all over Canada. However, I found a 2011 infant mortality rate for Saskatchewan is 6.43 children die per 1,000. This is really high, very, very high. Some of the reasons, birth defects, congenital anomalies, there's certain perinatal conditions. And this is actually preventable through education. When children are having children, often our children that are having babies do not take very good care of themselves. And as a result, their babies die. Sudden infant death syndrome. I always think, where are the cradle boards? Where are the traditional cradle boards? Accidents. So how does an infant get into an accident? This is the 4th leading cause of infant mortality rate. How do babies get into an accident? A lot of this is preventable. Here are some countries that are similar to Saskatchewan Indians in terms of infant mortality rate. Russia, 6.80. Down the bottom, Qatar, 6.40. Puerto Rico, Chile. These are countries that have the similar infant mortality rate as Saskatchewan Indians. In Canada, Canada has the 2nd highest infant mortality rate of comparable industrialized countries in the world. The lowest is Japan at 2.1. You want to have an infant mortality rate 2 or lower. And the United States is the highest, 5.8. The world's most developed country, the world's most powerful country, minus Trump, has the highest. Here's countries that have the highest in the world. Afghanistan, Somalia, Central African Republic, Guinea, Bissau, Chad. So there's a war going on in Afghanistan. So 110 babies die per 1,000 in Afghanistan. Leading causes of death of Aboriginal people in Canada. Here are the 5 top reasons why registered First Nations pass on. External injuries, accidental poisoning, vehicle accidents, intentional self-harm. So what's accidental poisoning? Overdose of alcohol, overdose of drugs. Second, diseases of circulatory system, neoplasm, cancer, respiratory disease, disorders linked to alcohol and drugs. Of this 5, 4 are preventable. 4 are preventable. Cancer is really hard to prevent unless you eat well, you take care of yourself, but there are other causes of cancer. Suicide and self-inflicted injuries were the leading causes of death for Indigenous people below 45 years of age. The reason why I'm showing this to you is to tell you we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. We cannot just sit around and not do anything. It's incumbent upon us to do something. And here's the latest statistics. A good friend of mine by the name of Randall Aki from University of California, Los Angeles, and his partner just recently did some research work in 2017, and they found out that Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan have the highest mortality rates for both status Indian males and females. So Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. The second bullet point is really interesting. Status Indian women and girls between the ages of 10 and 44 have higher mortality ratios compared to the general Canadian population than status Indian men. So our women, our young ladies, are dying at a higher ratio compared to the general Canadian population than status Indian men. What does that say? It means that we as men are not taking care of our girls and our women. It also means the federal government of Canada is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Third bullet point, mortality rates have not improved for status Indian women and girls on reserve in 30 years. We think things are getting better, they're not. And the relative mortality rates have not improved for all status Indian people in the past 40 years. Really interesting, huh? We think we're moving ahead really well, but we're really not. So that means we have a lot of work to do. Employment rates, where are we? I choose to take a look at employment rates as opposed to unemployment rate. The reason why is because the unemployment rate is not the best measure for population suffering from chronically high unemployment. It gives a skewed picture. Because once someone stops looking for work, she is no longer counted as an unemployed. She is defined as not being in the labor force, so then they're not counted. Whereas the employment rate or the employment to population ratio is a better measure for population suffering from chronically high unemployment. That's a better measure to get a true picture of what the employment rate really looks like. Here in Canada, 2011, the employment rate for Aboriginal is 52.1, non-Aboriginal 61.2. The employment rate for on reserve, 35.4, non-Aboriginal 61.2. The situation on reserve is much worse than off reserve. However, education is absolutely crucial. We have First Nations University of Canada right here. If you go to get a university's degree, you have an 80% chance of getting a job. If you get a high school degree, a secondary degree, you have a 66% chance of getting a job. With less than a high school, employment rate is 35%. It pays to get an education. It pays to go to school. It pays to graduate from high school. It pays to go on to higher education because then you are sure of getting a job. Income statistics, median income for Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people, Aboriginal 20,000, 701, non-Aboriginal 3195. Okay, now I've told you the bad news. Here's some good news. Here's some good news. Interestingly, from 2005 to 2011, the average income has increased for First Nations living on reserve by 2,600 to 18,600. That's not much, but there's an increase. Employment rate projections, this is in the Atlantic. I spent a bit of time in Nova Scotia. Maybe as high as 72%, and for Canada, 76%. So they're rivaling Canadian employment rates. So there's something going on in the Atlantic that's really good news. Aboriginal women, these are ages 25 to 64. Of 66,100 Aboriginal individuals with a university degree, 65% are women. 65% are women. There are all kinds of economic opportunities happening. I was just recently in BC, and I bought some Skechers 2-for-1 deal at Tsawwassen Mall. You know, the second largest mall after Edmonton is actually owned by Tsawwassen. Clarence Louis is going to be here next week. Asked him about his jail, his correction center that he's building. There's shipping contracts in Nova Scotia happening. There's all kinds of other stuff happening also. I was in North Vancouver at Silvertip. They're really doing amazing stuff. With a small piece of property, the amount of income that they're generating in that small space is just unbelievable. There's some really good news. Okay, so some more stories. I want to tell you both about U.S. First Nations and Canadian First Nations. Here's Mississippi Choctaw. I've been talking about Mississippi Choctaw for a long time. They're still doing really, really well. They have their own company, Choctaw Enterprises. They have their own clinics. They built these with their own money, by the way. And their governance structure is absolutely fantastic. The results, this morning, there were anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 black and white workers going on to the reserve to go to work. Interestingly, they had a traffic jam going on to the reserve. Usually you have people driving 100 miles an hour off the reserve, and they can't wait to get off, you know? There's white flight going on. But here you have white black workers wanting to go to the reserve to work. Interesting. So it provides 6,000 permanent full-time jobs for tribal citizens and others. 50% of its workforce is non-Aboriginal. Has an annual payroll of $100 million, one of the 10 largest private employers in Mississippi. Tribal revenues have helped reinvest more than $500 million in economic development projects in Mississippi. The language retention rate is increasing. These are the results. Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska, they set up Ho-Chunk Inc., very similar to Osuyus's development corporation. And the result is they have 24 subsidiaries, including hotels, gasoline retailing, wholesaling, grocery, convenience stores, marketing, telecommunication, construction, and so forth. Net revenue rose from $600,000 in 1995 to over $200 million today. Unemployment was cut by more than half over the first 5 years. Now it has over 1,000 employees, has generated more than $126.6 million in wages and salaries, has business or passive investments in 24 states and 10 foreign countries. And then here is really interesting. School enrollment increased by 32.5%. So I was asking Lance Morgan, who's the CEO of Ho-Chunk Inc., I said, how did you get kids to start coming to school? He said, when they saw how successful we were, they wanted to be successful too. No longer did they want to drop out of school, they wanted to stay in school. And the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska, a very tiny First Nation. A very tiny First Nation. And they're kicking butt, These First Nations that I'm talking about also includes Member 2 First Nation in Nova Scotia. They have a slew of businesses. They're the first Aboriginal First Nation probably in the world that's ISO certified, International Standard Organization. And now the results is this. They're the third largest employer in Cape Breton region. They have over 700 employees, and their total salaries exceed $15 million. I talk to Bern Christmas every so often, at least once a month. Really interesting what's happening. They came from a $4 million budget to a budget over $112 million, and only 13% comes from transfer payments. In fact, this is really interesting. In fact, Vern and Chief Christmas and others were telling me that there have been many times when the federal government wanted to give us money. And then we told them, no, we don't want your money. Why? Because it has strings attached. They said, we don't want to have those strings attached. We want to do it the way we want to do it. They're in a position to tell the federal government, we don't want your money. So that's why they only have 13% from transfer payments. They just opened a $19 million Member 2 Sports and Wellness Center. They have a shopping center that they're planned from a high unemployment to 90% employment. So they almost have nearly a 0% unemployment rate, like Mississippi Choctaws. From a high number of school dropouts to 100% high school graduation rate. This is absolutely phenomenal. No Mi'kmaq that goes to school from Member 2 drops out of school. They stay in school. The same reason that Lance Morgan told me is the reason why these kids don't drop out of school. They want to be successful. They see the success of their First Nation. They don't want to fail. So the nation itself has become a role model for them of success. So they stay in school. They do and work their hardest to remain in school and finish. And the language retention rate has increased, by the way. Osuyus, Chief Louis will talk about this probably next week. But all kinds of businesses. All kinds of businesses. One time I wanted to stay at Spirit Ridge Vineyard Resort and Spa, and it was booked up. So I said, hey, I know Chief Louis, I can get it in, So I called Chief Louis. He said, I can't do anything about it, You think Chief Louis is powerful? He's not. He couldn't even get me a room there at Spirit Ridge. And he said, we're booked for 2 years because of weddings, He says, if you want to get married, that's the place to get married, And I told him, I said, you should start a new byline, book a room now, find a spouse later, That way you can be assured of a place where you can have your wedding. So, they generate more than $7.2 million than it receives from the federal government, $4.5 million. So they make more of their own money than they get from the federal government of Canada. They have over 700 employees. They have a $100 million resort, which is Nikbik Resort, where I couldn't stay. Okanagan language is employed through Osuyus, even on traffic signs. Nikbik Cellars, considered the best winery in BC, the second best in Canada. They make red wine, white wine, ice wine. They're building a $193 million, 378-cell provincial prison. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but for Chief Louis, this is his business. They're planning a plush club and racetrack for car enthusiasts. You kind of wonder why. Because the Okanagan Valley has all kinds of millionaires, and where there's millionaires, there'll be fancy cars. So they have a place to play. So he's capitalizing on the market. Citizen Potawatomi Nation in Oklahoma. Here's their tribal headquarters back in 1971. All they had was $550 in the bank. Today, here's their new tribal headquarters, and they have over $522 million in the bank. They have over 2,400 employees, and they own the bank where the $550 was at. In fact, there are 8 branches. Chief Rocky Bear says, if you want to be successful, have your own bank, he says. Interesting, here's the result. It's created 7 of every 10 jobs in the city of Shawnee, Oklahoma. It spends 30 cents of every dollar spent in Shawnee. They contribute more than $5.4 million to more than 175 civic and charitable organizations in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Provides over $70 million wages and benefits. They have their new MBA program for citizen Potawatomi citizens. So the Citizen Potawatomi tribe has their own master's degree program in business administration. They have their own clinics, and they serve more than 70,000 patients and provides more than 4,000 college scholarships. So in their success, they know how to give back. They know how to promote a legacy of success. Can Indians run airline? Yes. Westwind Aviations. Many of you probably know this. Athabasca Basin Development owns 65%. Prince Albert Grand Council owns 22%. The rest is owned by the employees. They won the Best Managed Company as a platinum member. It's really hard to become a platinum member. It's really, really hard. And they did it. The Southern Ute Indian tribe, I would say, is the wealthiest Indian nation in the world. They make their money from oil and gas, but this is where they really made their money. They really made their money here in this building here. This is the largest building in Ignacio, Colorado, and it's their investment building. They have their own investment building. So they took their oil and gas money and gave it to money managers to invest for them. Now they have over $20 billion in the bank. And they own most of Durango, Colorado. They're ready to buy Durango Airport because their land surrounds the airport. You can retire when you're 60 years of age in Southern Ute. The Southern Ute tribe pays you retirement money. They have an unemployment rate that hovers between 5 and 7%. Ute language has increased. Reduced social pathologies. Alcoholism rate, drug abuse, domestic violence, they've all decreased as a result of their success. They have a AAA+ credit rating. I mean, that is really, really hard to do. The United States has an A, the state of California has a B, Greece is trash, Puerto Rico is trash, Spain is trash, Portugal is trash. But here, you can bet that they can borrow money almost any time they want. Their net worth, as I said earlier, is over $20 billion. They're set for life, by the way. The nation is set for life. For hundreds of years, the people are going to be taken care of because they have the money to do that. It's one of the largest employers in the county with over 1,500 employees. The language retention rate has increased. What about citizen entrepreneurship? I just talked to you about tribal entrepreneurs or tribal enterprises. Pine Ridge, South Dakota, consistently ranked as the poorest place in the United States. Their moment of success is private business. They have over 200 private businesses on reserve. That's where they're being successful. They started 26 tribal businesses and almost every single one failed. So you kind of wonder why. Why is it that private business works and then tribal enterprises doesn't work? I think it has something to do with culture. I think it has something to do with their sub-tribal allegiances. So the various districts on reserve are quite autonomous. And if you ask them, what's most important here often is sort of the individual entrepreneurship spirit is really very, very important. Here in Canada, you have all kinds of businesses. You have the Manitoba Mudlucks. We had a niece that stayed with us while she was going to college or while she went to high school, and she said, "I want to, where we live, it's in the high country. We get a lot of snow." She says, "I want some Uggs." I said, "What the heck is Uggs?" All these kids are wearing Uggs, and she said, "Oh, it's from Australia." Australia? Why do you want to buy something from all the way to Australia? Just go to Canada and get some mudlucks. It's better. It's also native made. It's also, just looks better. She said, "I want Uggs." So I got her some mudlucks, and she really, really liked it. So the question is, okay, why is there success occurring? It certainly isn't because of federal grants. We always hear location, location, location. We hear education. Maybe we just need lots more money and everything will be okay. Maybe we just have really good leaders. All of those things help, but here is part of the answer. It's really about governance. Why? Because it's how Indigenous nations organize themselves and how they make decisions, how they resolve disputes, and whether they operate under rule of law. So, governance means you have to have rule of law. There are all kinds of governmental forms out there in Indigenous countries, some that are very traditional, like Gittiaw, or Onondaga over in New York State. Some are very contemporary, like Dakota Whitecap, Citizen Potawatomi. Then there's some that are in the middle, sort of like Nisga'a and James James Bay Creek. So there are all kinds of governing structure out there. A lot of First Nations are experimenting with the fourth branch government. In short, the nation building challenge really is a governance challenge. And this is what we found out in the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development. We were trying to answer one question: why is it that some First Nations do better economically than others? We found out that you have to have sovereignty. Jurisdiction matters. You have to exercise your jurisdiction. If you don't exercise your jurisdiction, you're going to flounder. But you have to back up that action, that assertion, with capable governing institutions. You have to separate business from politics. You have to have good codes, rules, policies, and regulations. You have to have a really good third-party enforcer, often in the form of a court system. You have to have a really good bureaucracy. Somebody has to answer the phones, you know? One time I did a study and I called First Nations all over the United States just to see how people answer the phones. So I called this one First Nation and a young lady answered, "Hello?" I said, "Is this such and such a First Nation?" "Yeah." "Is so-and-so around?" "Yeah, I don't know where he's at." You know, there was a sense of unprofessionalism. You never know who's going to be on the other side of the phone. It might be a guy that wants to invest in the First Nation, you know? So you have to have a really good bureaucracy. And then culture matters in a contemporary sense. Legitimate, culturally grounded institutions of governance. This is what Chief Belgard was talking about earlier. If your governing structure does not match who you are, you're going to have problems. So the question is, what's the Cree way of governing? Think back to Okima. How are your values? What about Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota? What about Dene? What about those governing structure? What is it? What's the root of all of that? So culture really matters. Long-term thinking matters. If you don't plan for 100 years down the road, you're not going to reach your goals. Because grants that you get is 3 to 5 years. So you're only planning 3 to 5 years. You have to plan for 100 years down the road. You have to plan for the grandkids, the grandbabies. How are they going to live 50 years from now, 100 years from now? How do you want them to live? And then leadership is really, really important. I'm talking about ethical leadership. I'm talking about hardworking leadership. I'm talking about leaders that are peacemakers. I always heard that the highest leadership value in Cree society is to be a peacemaker and not to be an antagonist. Not to be somebody that wants to fight, you know? So, Okima, back when, were peacemakers first before anything else. You know, here's the common pattern. You have to have this jurisdiction sovereignty attitude. Okay, so what must change if you want to do this? At a foundational level, I believe we have to redetermine, rethink what sovereignty really means. It has to be grounded in Indigenous epistemology. It has to be grounded in the Cree way, in the Anishinaabe way, in the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota way, the Dene way, Stola way. And here's what I mean. I'm going to give you an example of how to rethink, redefine sovereignty from a Navajo perspective, because I know that best. In Navajo, we say, the net be'od if. The net be'od if means the net life way, Navajo life way. It includes a philosophy of life. It includes the use of the language. It includes culture, our ceremonies. It includes spirituality, our sense of place, land, governance. So the purpose of the net be'od if is this: to gain the blessings of good thinking, to gain the the blessings of, when you use your language, the blessings you get from using your language. To gain the blessings of planning, independence, balance, strength, harmony, knowledge. In Navajo, it's incumbent upon us to exercise Hojjon. Hojjon in Navajo means harmony, balance, beauty, goodness. That's the value we hold, probably the highest of any other value. And the purpose in life is to live to be 102 years old. So to practice what we think is really important in life will get us to be 102 years old, like my grandpa's. So the results of the Navajo is you end up maintaining balance and respect between people and everything around you. And with the holy people, the people that bless us every morning. And we live to be 102 years old. So how do we do that? We have to know the Navajo creation scriptures and the journey narrative. This is the root of where we come from. This is the root of knowledge, the root of wisdom. So for Navajo people, we have to know how we came through the worlds previously to today. And the journey narratives as well. I'll talk about that here shortly. So here's the creation scriptures. We believe we came from the black world, blue world, yellow world, and the white and glittering world. That's today. We've gone through the white world, now we're in the glittering world, the fourth world. This is what we believe. So now back to the beginning. This is the dwelling made of dawn. In this world, which is the white world, the holy beings created the Navajo people. And they gave us a spiritual name, the Hoka and the Yini. They loved us so much. The holy people loved us so much, they said, we're going to give you a name. Here's your name. The holy oath, the holy earth surface people. I love you so much, here's the name I'm going to give you. And we were gifted. These were gifts that were given to us. Foundational doctrines of laws. They pertain to the language. We were given our own language because the holy people loved us so much. They said, here's how you're going to speak. They said, we're going to give you this land and all that's in it. We're going to teach you how to conduct ceremonies. We're going to teach you about kinship relations, clan relations, and give you knowledge of how to live. And then chaos ensued in the white world. There were monsters that came and began to kill off Navajo people. The elders all got together and they said, what can we do about this? The reason why these monsters came is because they forgot about the covenants that they made with the holy people. They forgot about the foundational doctrines of language, ceremonies, culture, and so forth. There were a group of kids playing off on the side of the village while the elders were discussing this, trying to how to resolve things. And all of a sudden the kids disappeared and the children were not found. So the elders prayed and wanted to know what happened to the children. The holy people told them, the kids are taken away. They were taken to our most revered deity that lives on the Pacific Ocean. Her name is Changing Woman, Asana Claire. They said, we took the kids and gave them to her to reteach them because you've forgotten your ways. You've forgotten your laws. You've forgotten your language. You forgot how to pray. You forgot how to conduct your ceremonies. You forgot about kinship relations. So we're going to reteach your children about how to be Navajo. And so the people journeyed to the Pacific Ocean, to the beach there, waited there for 12 years until the children came back. That's the journey narrative. And then they journeyed back. That's the journey narrative. A lot of things happened during that time that teaches us how to be, how to act. And when they moved back to Navajo country, they said, we will never forget our foundational doctrines or laws anymore. We must always remember these laws because that's our salvation. And the covenants now has to be restored through a ceremony called the Beauty Way ceremony. And the ceremony occurred here beneath this mountain. This is a sacred mountain of the West. I lived right below this mountain in Flagstaff. We call this Doko sleep. So this Hojonja ceremony occurred right beneath that mountain where the covenants were restored. Where the Navajo people said, we will never forget who we are henceforth. Sanctification occurred. The re-sanctification of the sacred mountains occurred at this mountain. And here are our sacred mountains. So these sacred mountains, we were told, don't ever forget this. So we have songs, mountain songs that mentions all of these mountains. We can sing mountain songs all night long and never run out of mountain songs as a way to always remember where we come from, who we are, what we're all about. And this is our nationhood. The Creator, the holy people, loved us so much, they gave us a name, spiritual name. They gave us ceremonies. They gave us 6 sacred mountains. They promised us these lands in perpetuity and established us as an independent, sovereign nation. And the holy people said, these sacred mountains, we're going to call them Zithnata. Zithnata, they said, those are the sacred mountains. They blessed the sacred mountains with supreme power and authority. They blessed us with these gifts of prosperity and development. And these mountains, they form our celestial home. And all internal and external powers were given to them, these mountains. They're our leaders. The mountains are our leaders. So we have a story about how other people wanted to be leaders, other animals wanted to be leaders. The mountain lion wanted to be a leader. So they said, okay, you could be a leader. But then the mountain lion would disappear, you know. So where did they find him? Up on the top of a ledge of a cliff sleeping, you know. So they said, that's not a good leader, sleeps all the time. So they made the porcupine a leader. But the porcupine, when he gets mad, he shoots his quills, you know, and they said, it's not a good leader, let's get rid of him. And they made a wolf a leader. And the wolf was a good leader for a while, but then he runs off with the pack all the time, so it's not a good leader. And the coyote says, let me be a leader, you know. So they gave him leadership, and he screws up everything, you know. So he's not a good leader. So the Navajo people said, who's going to be our leader? The mountains will be our leader. So to this day, we look at the mountains as the true leaders of the Navajo people. So here's a pictograph of our celestial home. You have the mountains here, the 6 mountains, and all the gifts that are embedded in the Navajo people. That's why when we build our homes, we always build it this way. This is our terrestrial home. We build it in the same way that the holy people asked us to build our celestial home. So, the reason why I'm telling you the story is because how in your language do you think about sovereignty? What's sovereignty in your language? What does it mean? Where does it come from? What's the root of it? For Navajo people, we believe it comes from Zitnata. We believe that Nata means sovereignty. It's movement, it's power and authority. When we have our mountain ceremonies, they use this word. Medicine people use this word, Zitnata, in the songs. So, what's the Cree word for sovereignty? What's the Nakota, Dakota, Lakota word for sovereignty? What's the Dene word for sovereignty? What's the Stolo word for sovereignty? Where does it come from? What's the story about that? If culture has been lost, you're going to have to dig really deep to find it. But it's not impossible. So, Nahata is a derivative of Zitnata. That's doing sovereignty for Navajo people. That's how we exercise sovereignty. Planning, policy making, problem solving, peacemaking, language, governing, leadership is Nahata. And Nahata is nestled in the south. Good thinking is in the east. Planning is in the south. Life is in the west. And hope, songs, and prayers are the north. This is what we believe. So who does it? Natani does it. The leaders are Natani. Those who do sovereignty. They do it with wisdom, foresight, and persuasive authority. Here's a non-Aboriginal definition and perspective of Indigenous sovereignty. I've looked this up in the dictionary. There are all kinds of definitions of sovereignty. There are many definitions of sovereignty. It's just not one. In the next Supreme Court ruling that relates to a First Nation case, sovereignty definition is going to change again. But typically, here's how we're thought of. We're domestic dependent nations. We depend on the federal government for our existence. We're semi-sovereign. This is how we're viewed. This is how we're thought of. It's based on racism and ignorance. So the results of this definition of sovereignty is this. We often don't have powers or authority over non-Aboriginal people that come to our lands and commit a crime. It favors non-Aboriginal interests over First Nation interests. When something is found beneath the ground, you have to get permission from the province or the federal government before you can even draw it out. Federal power hangs over First Nations all the time. If you're going to change your government, you're going to set up your own court system, the federal government says, okay, go ahead, but we're going to take money away from you. There's always this ultimate threat to take over. Indigenous sovereignty depends on federal acknowledgement. That's why our leaders are always flying to Ottawa. To get acknowledged, to negotiate for stuff. So, here's a comparison. The outside, their views of sovereignty is aristocracy-based. It came from the kings and queens of Europe. So they brought over this definition of sovereignty to our land, and they said, this is sovereignty. It's based on kings and queens. For Navajo people, it's holy beings based. The holy people gave this to us, and it cannot change. Whatever the holy people give you, you cannot change it. Nobody can change it. It's there forever. There are all kinds of views of sovereignty, whereas over here at Navajo, it's sacred mountain focus. Very clear. Here it's temporary because, as I said earlier, the definition can change pretty quickly. Here it's permanent. There's a limited emphasis on language and culture, whereas for Navajo, it's all about culture, it's all about language. So these definitions that we have to deal with, it squeezes us from the outside in. That's why we have a hard time exercising our jurisdictional muscle. Why not go from the inside out? Let's define and determine what sovereignty means in our own language, in our own ways, and then use it to move out. So for Navajos, we have the first laws and rules that were laid for us as Navajo people. This is, primordial doctrines. When we came up from the third world to the fourth world, we were told, here are your laws to live by. We call it Bebehasani Batsesale. From these laws, we get Zitnata, which is mountain movement, mountain laws, authority, power, laws. Then we have sovereignty, the definition of sovereignty, Nata. Then we have Nata, you're exercising sovereignty. Some years back, I had a knee issue, and I went to see my physical therapist, and I'll never forget this. He says, well, we were exercising, he says, motion is lotion, he says. If you want to exercise sovereignty, you got to move it. You got to just do it, like the Nike principle, if you have sovereignty, you got to exercise it. Otherwise, you're going to lose it. So you do sovereignty, Nahata. Who does it? Nahtani. Then we believe that this is what a lot of us are thinking about doing at Navajo. Let's get rid of all the laws that are at Navajo and let's rewrite them based on the new definition of sovereignty. Rewrite all of our laws according to who we are, what we're all about. So we think that this is the road to true nation building. The second piece of the puzzle, capable governing institutions. You have to have really good governments. Why? They establish and enforce the rules by which communities and their citizens organize action, cooperate, and interact with each other and with outsiders. Government plays the key role in that. So the political challenge is to make investors feel safe and secure. If I were to invest in your nation, is my money going to be safe? If you're an Indian government, your chief and council only probably has 2-year terms or 3-year terms. And in the next election, a new chief and council comes on. How can I be sure that the new chief and council is going to remember the contract I signed with them, the previous administration? Are the rules clear? So you have to have rules that investors can trust. If they cannot trust your rules, they're not going to invest with you. That's why member 2 went ISO route, where the rules are clear in the international standard organization. So now they can trade with up to 180 different countries throughout the world, because the rules are clear. That's why Osuyu set up a development corporation. That's why Winnebago tribe set up a development corporation. That's where the rules are at. The Indian Act screws up the rules. Test 1, you have to have leadership and managerial effectiveness. These are all First Nations that have leadership and managerial effectiveness. Somebody has to do the work and has to do it well. And if you're going to set up a governing institution, you have to separate business from politics. Chief and council cannot get involved in the day-to-day operation of the nation. I've heard a lot of stories of managers working for First Nations that would say, This counselor tells me one thing, this other counselor tells me the opposite thing, and I don't know what to do because I'm going to piss off one or the other if I do something. So I just play solitaire on my computer. So you're hiring really good help to play solitaire on the computer because the rules aren't clear. You have to separate business from politics. Chief and council should be worried about setting the long-term direction for the nation. Let the managers run the show. And don't put your hands in the cookie jar to put money in your pocket, you know? Chief and councils have known to do that once or twice. Here's a council-run model. Council's here, CEOs here, employees are here. When an employee gets fired, all he has to do is go back to the council and gets their job back. This is a typical Indian Act operation. Here's a separated model. Council is here, board is here, CEO is here, employees are here. Once somebody gets fired or has all kinds of problems and issues, they cannot approach the council cannot approach the employees. So you have an efficient and an effective operation. I've been to a couple of council meetings where the whole day was about someone getting their job back because they knew they were relatives to one of the councilors or to the chief. You know? And they bring grandma and grandpa with them, and they bring all their relatives with them to the council meeting, you know? They all sit up front there, you know? I'm on the agenda, and they never get to me. Because the whole day is about grandma and grandpa, mom and dad telling the chief and councilor, give my son back his job, even after he was drinking for four times and was fired 4 times. You know? And that family was very, very powerful. There's a lot of votes there, so to appease your constituents, they hired the guy back. You know? That's no way to run an operation. I know it never happens here in Saskatchewan. You know? So we did a study. We said, okay, here's a council-run model operation, here's a separated model operation. If you go to the separated model, you have a 5-to-1 chance of actually doing well. You're nearly 5 times as likely to be profitable if you go the separated route. Test 2, at Citizen Potawatomi Nation, they have one of the best court systems around. I know here in Canada, you're not allowed to have a court system. But there are ways to get around this. You can set up your own peacemaking court system, which gets around this mandate, which is this really stupid mandate, by the way, that the federal government said you can't have a court system. You can have sentencing circles, you can have all of that, but you still have to go to tribunal to get resolved issues. When often tribunals don't know your own laws. This is how you lose your laws, the foundational doctrines and laws that govern who you are as a people. And Citizen Potawatomi Nation has one of the best laws, court system around. You have to make sure this guy doesn't show up. Not Johnny Depp, but the pirate. This is some of the political piracy is the biggest issue in the world in terms of governance. So who's a political pirate in Russia? Putin. If you go there to invest, you have to pay off people to get your investment taken care of. And you can never be sure where your money goes, you know? We'll see where Trump falls on this, you know? We'll see. But to prevent political piracy, leaders must be ethical, above board, transparent. They cannot put their hands in the cookie jar and make money off of the people. So you have to have rules and laws to govern that. In the old days, when somebody stepped out of line, the elders knew who stepped out of line, and they would scold them, take care of them. And you can't do that. You can't do that. That's not the Cree way. That's not the Dakota, Lakota way. That's not the Dene way. That's not how we act as leaders. So, if you don't remember in the old ways that you have to write down your own rules and regulations on paper. And then you have to have an enforcement mechanism that makes sure these rules are followed. So different First Nations have done this. Navajo Nation, we have a Supreme Court. We have our fundamental law of the land is based on Navajo creation stories and the journey narrative. And as I said earlier, in the old days, if you stepped out of line, elders would take care of you. The finger waggers would come after you. Test 3, capable requires legitimacy. You have to have a legitimate political structure. And this is the Cree way that we're talking about, legitimacy, that people have to believe it. Governing institutions must match community beliefs about how authority should be organized. If I ask you what the Cree way is, what would you say? What is that way, you know? What about the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota way? What about the Stolo way? How is it? Here's the Indian Act in 1876. The Indian Act, when it was enacted, was just made bands as administrative units. And what I mean by that is, you get a grant from the federal government, they tell you how much money they're going to give you, they tell you how much you're going to spend, and then they check to make sure you spent it the right way, and then they tell you how you should evaluate it, and then you send the evaluation report to them, and then you get the same grant proposal, white out from last year's and then put in the new one, and then you send it back, get the same money again. You know? So you're basically just an arm of the federal government. You're not really governing. You're just an administrative unit of the federal government. Member 2 is not an administrative unit of the federal government. Osuyus is not. Mississippi Choctaw is not. And you have limited decision-making power, organizations dictated by Ottawa, no independent judicial function, politicized business management. This is the Indian Act. There's a cultural mismatch. Indian Act government is often non-Indigenous, imposed, and ineffective. You want to get Indigenous chosen and effective political systems. Pre-invasion, you had all kinds of political systems. Then all of a sudden, the Indian Act came and just said, okay, you know, one size fits all governing structure. Now there's a movement towards different forms of political systems. There's a movement out there of First Nation constitution making. Really interesting time. This is really, really interesting. There are First Nations out there remaking their political system, and it's catching fire more and more. Here's Saskatchewan. Onion Lake, Little Pine, although Little Pine didn't pass it because lawyers drew up the Constitution and messed things up. So don't let a lawyer draw out your Constitution. Little Black Bear, First Nation, Star Blanket. And then here are the other key First Nation, Thunderchild, Ocean Man. These all have new constitutions. These are First Nations they're thinking about it. It's under construction. Canoe Lake, Pasqua, Howassis, Red Earth, George Gordon, and then others. Meadow Lake is thinking about, Meadow Lake is a tribal council, so their individual First Nations are considering constitutions as well. Meadow Lake, very similar to File Hills, Capel, Curve Lake First Nation as well. Here's Manitoba, Sioux Valley, Dakota Nation. Here's Yukon Territory. Those that have constitutions, Northwest Territories, St. Cho, Demon, Newfoundland, Labrador, Inuit, Ontario. So there's this movement that's occurring. This is really interesting times where First Nation, through the Self-Governance Act, are writing their own constitutions. So the question to ask is, are the governments that you have truly your government? Are the governments capable of dealing with the challenges you face? If not, you might need to change them. You might need to rethink how you're governed. All along the way, putting in values that are absolutely critical to you remaining who you are, like respect, like elders. And by the way, not everybody's an elder. You know, there are seniors and there are elders. When I was working here for First Nations University years ago, we asked a group of elders, who's an elder? I asked them, who's an elder? There were about 25 elders. They said, you have to be over 50 years old, you have to have grandchildren, you have to speak your language, you have to know your culture, you have to be respected in the community. And I said, why? One of the elders said, in my community, there are two elders, they say they're elders, but they're not elders, she said. Because they just got out of prison, they fit all of these criteria, but they're not respected in the community. They still have to earn their eldership, she said. And it's got to be integrity, honesty, you know, absolutely critical. Leaders have to be honest. Because who demands it? Our grandchildren demand it. If leaders are not honest and respectful, our grandchildren will act the same way. There has to be transparency. This transparency is absolutely critical. I heard stories of when the Okima would get together in teepee, the youngest would sit at the doorway, the oldest would sit on the other side. And it would start with the youngest, everybody would speak. Everybody knew what was going on, all the way to the oldest. So everybody knew what everybody thought. There was no hidden agenda. A good friend of mine, Joe Flies, always says that nation's laws are the deepest expression of its culture. They say what we value and how we intend to get along with and hold ourselves together as a people. So our laws have to be based on our culture. If you want your culture to stay alive, turn it into a law and make sure you enforce it. Fourth piece of the puzzle, we've got to think long-term. We've got to plan long-term. How do we want our grandchildren to live 100 years from now? What kind of clothes do you want them to be wearing? What kind of language do you want them to be speaking? How do you want them to pray? What kind of education do you want them to have? What kind of homes do you want them to have? How do you want them to act and behave? Those are really important questions. If you don't answer these questions now, these children are going to evolve haphazardly. They're going to become gang members. They're going to think they're gangsta, like black guys on TV, you know? And it becomes a reality for them. So we have to plan for these children. When they become 50 years old, we want them to look back at us and you can recognize them. You know what they look like. The last piece of the puzzle, we've got to have really good leaders. Leaders make choices, their choices matter. Effective nation building depends on the choices they make. Here's the nation building approach. You claim jurisdiction, you build capable government institutions, you identify strategic priorities and concerns, you craft development policies, choose projects, and you implement them. A lot of leaders, once they claim jurisdiction, they go and choose a project, implement them, everything falls apart. Because there's no foundation from which to work. There's no rule of law for these projects to stand up. So it's a concerted process, it's a specific process. Along the way, there has to be cultural match and effectiveness. The organization of government must pass these two tests. Do people believe that this government is theirs? That's cultural match. Effectiveness, does the governance system have what it takes to get the job done? If one of these tests aren't met, you're going to have a hard time. So government carries primary responsibility for creating a government of good rules. Rules that are stable, that reduce uncertainty, and that people trust and respect. Rules are more important than resources. You have to have rules, and they have to be enforced. Rocky Bear from Citizens of Potawatomi says, a tribal government without good rules is just a bad family reunion. How true. So, in conclusion, Indigenous nations that are successful on their own terms use strong leadership, assert the right to govern themselves, exercise that right effectively by building capable government institutions that match their cultures. So, what's nation building all about? It's about culture. It's about health. One of the most fascinating hospitals I've seen over here at Five Hills Capel, Tribal Council, just Chief Milgard talked about this earlier. Fascinating hospital. It's about taking care of the land. It's about natural resources. It's about education. This is a school in Membertou that the Membertou built with their own money. It's about elders. It's about veterans. It's about our own people. It's really about all of this, realizing the nation's dreams. It's not about the goodies. It's about the grandchildren. And Satsan, a good friend of mine, said, putting a new memory in the minds of our children, absolutely crucial. It's about the grandchildren and those that are not born yet. There are children that are going to be born. How are we going to take care of them? Who's going to take care of them? How are we going to provide for them? They're coming. They're on their way. So, from where the sun now stands, we have to get ready for them. We have to build governing institutions that work, that match who they are, rooted in Indigenous epistemology. To me, I think that is true nation building. Thank you.